Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings and welcome. My name is Nariza Fahim, and I'm the host of today's ASQ Lean Enterprise Division webinar. We hold these webinars once each month, and they are free to all our members. Our webinars are recorded, so previous webinars are available on the ASQ Lean Enterprise Division YouTube channel. Our topic for December 12th, the Lean webinar is TPS in a non-factory setting. And the presenter for that webinar is Alan Michaels, a continuous improvement manager for Alabama State Port Authority. Our topic for today, October 29th, which is 1 p.m. Eastern Time and 10 a.m. Pacific Time, is a practitioner's guide to lean. And the presenter is Chris Hayes, our ASQ LED past chair, a very knowledgeable individual to whom I consider my role model. Some logistics, everyone will be on mute, but you are free to post questions to the presenter as you think of them. Chris Hayes has reserved about 10 minutes at the end to answer your questions, which we will take one at a time. Here's Chris Hayes.
Well, thank you, Nariza. I really appreciate that introduction, and I really appreciate you asking me to participate in the webinar series. I've always loved the webinar series that we've done for the members, and I know we get a lot of compliments on them. Hello, everyone else on the call. Like Nariza said, my name is Chris Hayes. I am the CEO of Impact Performance Solutions. We're a consulting and training company. That's my day job and sometimes my 2 a.m. Job as well. I have volunteered for ASQ, gosh, for lots of years now. I've served in many different leadership roles over the years, including the chair of the Lean Enterprise Division and regional director for the Sections Affairs Council. I am this year publications chair for the Lean Enterprise Division, and I was most recently elected to the board of directors for the 2019 through 2021 term. So that's going to be an interesting change in my volunteer status with ASQ. I hold an MBA and a bachelor's degree in project management. I've been a practitioner of Lean for probably about 21 years now, and when I say about 21 years, that's practicing this thing we call Lean. Of course, like many others, we've practiced aspects of Lean way before that term became popular. I have found ways to implement Lean that work over the years, like many others, and I've also found a lot of ways in experimentation that don't. I've had lots of success, and I've had equally as many failures in my implementation methods. Let's see if I can get my slides to advance here. They were working a minute ago. There we go, there we go. The first thing that you need to know is that when it comes to Lean or any other improvement philosophy for that matter, is that there really is no way, right way or wrong way to do it. Many of us have gone lots of different years learning and changing our practices, and most of us have looked back 10 years later and wondered, you know, what were we thinking? How did we actually get anything out of that? Today, what you're going to do is you're going to listen to about 45 minutes-ish of what I've learned over the years and my personal opinion on some good things to consider when implementing Lean. So while there are many good suggestions I or others could give you for applying Lean as a practitioner, when I first was asked to do this presentation, I thought, gosh, there are so many good things that I could share with people, and so many good things from other people that I could share. I only had these 45 minutes. So I came up with 7 rules that I think if you follow them, you're going to have some pretty good success in your own implementations of Lean. These rules are ones that unfortunately I had to learn the hard way through years of trial and error. So maybe some of them will be, you know, gimmies for you guys and some of you, and they're like, duh, but others others of you, maybe there might be some ahas in here, and that's the goal of the webinar today. So let's get started with the 7 rules for applying lean practically and successfully. Following them won't necessarily make every lean implementation run as smooth as glass, but they will help you manage the majority of your implementations, I believe. There are always exceptions to every rule, and you should look out for those exceptions. So keep that in mind as we're going through the presentation. So the first rule is to determine whether you need fast wins. Fast wins are those times when you need to implement in such a way that the organization will see true benefits right away, as opposed to implementing in a more slow, steady, and culturally driven method. Understanding what expectations exist or what problem is trying to be solved by implementing lean is extremely important before you start. This is one of those things that I didn't get in the beginning. Different individuals in a company, they may have different opinions on lean in general, let alone on your methodology for implementation. You're going to need to make sure that all relevant influencers and sponsors' expectations are considered when you decide how you're going to put this thing into force. If there's a financial burning platform or maybe a need to show evidence of lean's power, you may need to work towards a quick win before you start working on some of the more critical cultural aspects of lean. We all know, or I think we all know, we're starting to understand that lean is just not this tool-driven thing, that we really need to bring in that cultural piece, but sometimes that's not the appropriate way to do it. Remember that if you're convincing people, you may need to show evidence of the benefits of lean, and evidence that you're going to show the CFO, for instance, is not going to be the same evidence that you might show others in the organization. If the CFO is a naysayer and he's a large influencer, you may need to spend some time understanding which project is going to give the most return on investment. He's going to be thinking, or she's going to be thinking, all about dollars. When I was taught lean, we were taught that you have to start with building the foundation of lean. I'm sure you guys have all seen the Toyota production system house. And at the bottom, stability was always meant to mean 5S. And so we were taught to implement 5S first. You can't do all sorts of improvements unless you get those 5 S's and that stability in place. That's not always the truth I found over the years. I remember when I made, uh-oh, I'm getting some feedback. Oh, it's gone. I remember, anyway, I remember when I was making the transition from implementing tools to implementing systems, because at first we were taught just go do Kanban, just go do 5S, just go do SMED, whatever those tools in that toolbox was. And at some point, we all kind of realized that that wasn't working. And so we made this transition to implementing lean management principles, which are more geared around the culture. This was really quite the breakthrough for many of us, because we were taught to do it a certain way. Like I said, we were taught to do 5S first, then standardization came next, and so on. And so there was this path that we had. And I was working for the MEP for years, and I remember we had our little house that was built, and there was this order to things that we were supposed to follow. By the time we got through 5S, which required we did some, Lean 101 training, these one-day courses with simulations in them, the company CEO in this particular case was so angry that he wasn't seeing any results on the profit and loss statement that, sad moment in my time, but I actually got fired. Our company, they called us in and said, you know what, this 5S stuff looks great. The workplace is all, spit shined and it looks pretty, but you did nothing for me when it came to the profit and loss statement. They couldn't see it. The problem is that CFO, or CEO, excuse me, he had a burning platform that I wasn't aware of. The company net profit had dipped, And his expectations going in, because he had read a few books and he talked to a couple of different CEOs that had implemented Lean, his expectations were that Lean were going to help him with his net profit issues. The company that came in after us, they took the time to understand the problems. They understood what the company was facing, and they geared their first project toward an immediate resolution to those projects. Talk about a humbling learning experience, but we all have this journey where we learn things sometimes the hard way. But you really have to make sure that you're seeing where those problems are, and maybe 5S really isn't the where you want to start. Organizations want to know what you can do for them, why they should adopt your view, and the steps they need to follow to take action. That's what they're looking for. As you plan for your Lean implementation, you're going to want to consider all of those stakeholders' needs. That means that you have to actually ask them about it. If you want to be a good practitioner, then you need to ensure that you're answering these questions for them. You can't answer what you can do for them until you fully understand what they need. You can't answer why they should adopt your view unless you can connect Lean as a solution to what they need. And then finally, of course, you need to make sure that they understand the actions you're asking them to take to resolve their issues, because it's not just you, they have skin in the game. After I learned that first lesson with the company that I tried to push 5S on, I began to spend a lot more time in the planning phases of my Lean implementations. Excuse me, I'm going to grab just a quick drink here. My lips are stumbling over themselves. What I did was I began to hold special Lean strategy meetings with management specifically to identify pain points and to prioritize which needs needed resolving first. So what this allowed them to control or do is control the plan instead of me pushing my ideas of what should be done and how it should be done on them. In some cases where culture was a huge issue for them, we did spend time working on first on the standard work for leaders, maybe. In other situations where they were, for instance, struggling to meet customer delivery dates, we targeted projects that would move waste in the process. And then in other cases, perhaps where they had, maybe no burning platform or real pain points, maybe just a slow time of the year, we took a more slow approach. We spent time educating the organization's workers on the principles and the language of Lean, and then we slowly created centers of excellence that could be replicated throughout the organization, which is, the ideal way to do it, a little bit slower approach. I'll never forget a lunch I had with one of my mentors in Lean, Paul. He left the MEP. He worked with me at MEP, and he left and started working in a position with a small company nearby. And at this point, we had a pretty methodical way of implementing Lean. Like I said, you had a certain way you did it, and we did it the same with every client. The first thing was to run a bunch of Lean 101 classes for everybody. We had to get them to understand the language, and the idea was slow and steady, allowing those teams to drive the improvements, letting them come to conclusions on their own, and kind of standing back and more mentoring than getting results. He told me that day when we were at lunch that he had learned a valuable lesson. So he got out there and tried things, and he said he tried it the way that we learned, but he couldn't get any of the people first of all, to go to any of the meetings. They were always gone, and he really couldn't get them to buy in. The process was just taking too long for them. They wanted to see quick results, and it was affecting production in a very overcapacitated situation already. So he quickly learned that, he really needed a different approach in that particular company. And he began doing quick Kaizen events where, that were targeted at improving for them at that time throughput, because capacity was an issue. And he said it really felt odd to him, but because that's not how we did it, but it was what the company needed, and he had to alter and adapt to the needs of the company. And once they saw that lean could, what it could do to help them free up capacity, you know, they were a little more willing to take the time to learn other ways that lean could help, and they were a little bit more open to taking, you know, one-day classes where they could learn all of this stuff. But again, he had to adapt, and we all have to adapt. You've got to be able to listen to the voice of your customer and understand what it is they need, even if that customer is the company you work for. The second one, wow, that flew off the screen real quick. Second rule is to make sure that you align your lean initiatives with the objectives of the organization. So in rule 1, we're really talking about the needs of the organization, but now we're talking about a very direct alignment with actual objectives. What is it that the company is trying to achieve? Every organization has goals that they're trying to reach. They may not be written down, but they exist. The magic bullet that I found here is to find at least one objective that the lean project you're recommending working on aligns to, or even if you didn't recommend it, whoever recommended it or whatever it is that you're about to do, make sure that it's going to make a difference to one of those objectives. Remember those stakeholders, and especially like in the story I gave you, the CEO that had that burning platform, you've already convinced them in many cases that lean is a good thing, and you've considered that their expectations. They're going to want to know why they should invest their resources into particular projects, and helping them make a connection between the project and the company's objectives is really going to help gain not only buy-in, but ultimately make the project a better project. It's not enough in most companies to do lean just to do lean because it's a good philosophy. You'll need to show them what benefits they're going to receive, how it's going to affect the things that matter to them the most in a measurable way. And we're going to talk about measurements here in a few minutes. But most often when I come into a company, especially if they're already practicing lean, I see some versions of implementing lean that resembles that fun carnival game Whack-A-Mole. Anybody remember that? Where you're just kind of, the moles pop up and you have to go find them and whack them down. Sometimes it's because lean is being driven at a lower level in the organization, maybe by a quality or an operations manager, but not yet fully accepted or driven by maybe top management. In these instances, the drivers aren't particularly in the know, or the people that are driving it, I should say, aren't particularly in the know sometimes when it comes to the objectives of the company, nor do they, you know, even know the pain points of the organization. What results is a lot of times is a lot of really good projects that do a lot of really good things internally, but they never really benefit the organization as a whole when it comes to the things that the organization is trying to achieve. So maybe the improvement helps one area, but negatively affects another area. That happens sometimes too, where you go into a production area and we increase throughput. You know, we focus our efforts on that, and throughput's a good thing to do. We may not necessarily have an objective, but we probably do some type of objective around it. But you also have to be really careful that by speeding things up, that we don't negatively affect maybe the quality of the product. We call this sub-optimization, and that's why it's really important to make sure that we're making some decisions at that high level and tying them to objectives to make sure that we don't negatively affect somewhere else. So in order to be fully effective, you really have to make sure that lean gets driven by the pains of the organization and not at the whim of whoever's, you know, maybe the most accepting or eager for change. By using lean methodologies as a pain solution and prioritizing those initiatives according to the severity of the pains, lean's going to always be seen as a value added effort. And especially when they're tied to those objectives of the organization. And so if, for instance, if we have, the company has created 3 objectives, and many companies are ISO 9001 certified or AS 9100 if you're in aerospace or one of the certifications, but all of those certifications require that companies have objectives. They're really focusing on strategy planning. And so as a lean practitioner, what you want to make sure that you're doing is that you're playing a role in helping the organization achieve, not only set those objectives, but achieve those. Lean can do wonders when it comes to achieving goals, but you need to know what they are, and you need to purposefully take one of them and say, okay, if our objective is to reduce scrap by 20%, then what kind of lean initiatives can we do, and where do we need to do it? Where is most of that scrap coming from? Where do we want to go in and maybe do a Kaizen event, or look at the processes, and work a lean initiative there? So making that connection again is one of the important things that I didn't learn in my early days. That was one of the things that I had to learn the hard way. If you can do that, you will find as a lean practitioner that you will not only help the organizations in a very meaningful way, but you're also going to add value, and you'll be seen as a value-added member of the organization's team, as a strategy achieving member. Now we get to rule 3, make the project measurable. The mistake I and many other lean practitioners made in our beginnings, most of these rules, by the way, came from mistakes I made. I didn't do any of these in the beginning. I hadn't heard of them. We've just learned over the years. We didn't measure anything. We just went in, swept in, and did things. We did a 5S or maybe a Kanban project, and when it was done, we felt great about it, but we didn't really have evidence of the success of the project at all. As a matter of fact, the people that, you go into an area that's been 5S, it looks amazing, right? You go into an area that we've put in some 2-bin Kanban system, it looks great, and it probably most likely has done some good things, but you don't really know because we didn't ever get a measurement in the beginning and be able to compare it to a measurement afterwards. In most cases, that's all we ever needed in the beginning because nobody really questioned anything. It looked good, so it must have done something good. Lean back then was new enough that companies just really took it for gospel that it made a positive impact. But then they read a book and said it was great, so it must be great, right? But then the tide started changing. CFOs really started looking at things. They wanted to know what they were getting for their money. They needed to see things on their P&L. CEOs demanded that we show evidence that the project had some sort of success. Paying clients, they started getting a little wiser, and they started questioning, does lean really do anything for them? And so not only from a evidence-based platform, but when it comes to convincing companies, maybe it's your own bosses, maybe it's your executive team, but when if you're looking at rule number 2 there, where we're going to align with an objective, and objectives usually have some sort of a measurement to them or in a target, if you can take one of those measurements, and maybe it's a measurement at a lower level than the high level reduce scrap by 50%, if you can take a measurement or a couple of measurements and say, hey, if we do this lean project, this is where the needle's going to change. This is where we're going to get our improvements. And this is by how much we think. So I think that this rule is really imperative. It's, of course, it's just not for lean project. I believe that really no project should ever commence without knowing what you're trying to achieve and how you're going to know whether you in fact did achieve any results. Because in the statistics world, we all know that variation is normal. We have some variation in everything we do. And so we need to be able to say, did it really change because of what we did, or did it just change because it varies? So it's really a good idea for any project at all. But the first step that you need to do, knowing that you need some sort of metrics in place, is you're going to have to work with the management to understand the goal of the project. Now, you might actually be bringing that goal to them, or the suggestion of the goal, but one way or another, management has to be involved. You need to know, are we trying to cut down customer service call time to improve customer satisfaction? Maybe that's what they want us to do. Is the problem is that customer satisfaction has gone down, and they're convinced that it has to do with the customer call time. Or maybe we're attempting to improve quality of a process, and we were having issues there. Understanding where the problems are is going to help us develop the metrics to measure the success of the problem, measure the success of the project. As part of deciding on the measurements, though, you need to get the key stakeholders and the sponsors really involved at this point. You want to agree on this stuff. Ask them what success would look like and how they would like to measure it. Again, of course, you have to agree on that. You can't just let them, tell you, well, we want a $50,000 return on this 5S project, because we know that that's possibly not realistic. But somehow you want those measurements. So decide on what the the metric is going to be, and then make sure you understand what the target is that you're going to shoot for. Is it an increase in throughput that they would like to see? How, if that's it, I'm all tied up today. How are you going to measure throughput? There's lots of different ways that you can measure throughput. Is it going to be a monthly average? Is it a percentage, or is it going to be an item increase? Does it count orders, or is it going to count parts or line items? All of these different things have to be worked out. Sometimes we just assume that it's going to be a certain way, but we need agreement on that, and it needs to be very detailed. How are we going to measure success? Once you determine these things, you're going to need to obtain current metrics as a baseline. If there aren't any current measurements, maybe they're not measuring that particular thing, then you're going to have to make sure that part of your scope of your project is to get a baseline. So if they want to measure throughput as of line items average monthly, then you need to go get that current state. Where are we at today? They may have it, and then you just need to mark it down. But if they don't, you're going to have to figure out how to do it. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge in companies that don't have a lot of data that they're measuring. But it'll be important to get that current state. Now, you've agreed on what a reasonable targets is. Make sure that the targets that they pick, and for you as well, you want it to be a stretch goal. You don't want it to be so simple that anybody could get it, but it does have to be realistic. You want to make sure that you have a chance on for the team to actually accomplish that target. Make sure that you assign responsibilities for monitoring and measuring whatever objectives and measurements that you've agreed on, because you want to make sure that you're understanding where you're at throughout that project, so that you know whether you're on track to meet it. If you wait until the end to figure out that you missed your target, there's not much sense and not much ability to really go back and fix things. So if you're monitoring and keeping it up all the time, you've got a little bit more of an ability to be flexible and adjust your sales. In God we trust, all others bring data. We've probably all heard that one. Data is what we're looking for. We want real numbers, if at all possible. The first thing, though, is make sure you're not trying to measure everything. It's only going to bring you headaches and analysis paralysis if you try to do that. Pick one or two realistic measures to use. Think minimalism when it comes to how many KPIs you're going to have. One is perfectly fine if that makes sense. You really have to think about what problem you're trying to solve, and are there specific measurements that we need to know in order to see that success. Second, and not really second, like I said, data beats every argument. You can't. It used to be said that you can't argue data. Data can be manipulated to look like one thing or another, but for the most part, if you bring data to somebody and it's backed up, you're not going to get much argument over that. It is sometimes okay to have discussions that aren't data backed, by the way. We don't have data for everything, but if it's a really important decision or it's a really important project, extracting the data, even if it's a little challenging, is always going to be your best bet. So let's take a look at some common lean metrics. And by the way, there's so many more. I just wanted to go over a few of them in case there's some of you that are not used to measuring your projects. The first, and these are in no particular order of importance by any means, just kind of what I grabbed first. The first one here is the created versus finished type of metric. It can apply to product, it can apply to tasks, it can apply to just about anything. How many tasks or products were, if it's a product, we're looking at how many were planned, and then how many were finished. In the task world, if we assigned 50 tasks to be done, how many of them actually got completed? It's really a straightforward metric, and it's tracking, like I said, either tasks or products or whatever over some given period of time. Best case scenario in this particular metric is a ratio that comes out to be 1. We want to create 50 tasks and we want to complete 50 tasks. That's not always the case. Realistically, that doesn't happen. But what this metric is going to do is it's going to help you determine whether you have more demand than you can serve, or maybe it's the opposite. You finish work at a faster rate than you need. So it's a resource kind of thing. It allows you to balance things. That's the key. So created versus finished, it's really a good starting point and can easily be tracked without having really any specialized software or systems or anything. Some other data and metrics, they might require a little bit more complex computing, but this one's a pretty easy one. You're just going to export or count the number of tasks created and which ones were finished, and create a little bar chart like we have on the screen here. This one is work in process or work in progress, whichever you call it, WIP, tracking work items that are started but not yet finished. That's what we're looking at, and this can help you improve really the overall flow of value through the system itself. Practically speaking, if you think about it, work can't add value to the customer, the team, the organization, whatever it is, unless it's finished. Otherwise, it's just sitting there. However, WIP does play, a critical role when you want to monitor and analyze your workflow capacity as well. So this is why it's important to track work items that are in progress, but not finished yet. So some companies, they don't bother looking at it, but it is an important component of what you're doing. By tracking this, not only can you determine, the capacity, but you can also improve that flow of value. You can easily monitor your WIP. You can do it on Kanban cards. You can do it on bar charts. You can do it in software. There's all sorts of different ways to do it. You can see on the screen here, we have some pretty simple icons. You've got a red frowny face, a yellow, we're doing all right, and then the green big smile there says everything is awesome. Another thing to bring into this is that WIP is really a great metric to keep because it's part of a calculation we use to understand the relationship between WIP, throughput, and lead time. WIP will always be our throughput multiplied by our lead time and vice versa. We can calculate lead time by knowing what our WIP and dividing it by our throughput. So this is kind of a little math. This is called Little's Law. It's one of the lean formulas that, if you haven't heard, is a good one to look up and spend some time on, because everything, the three things that are inside this formula affect each other. If we have more WIP, that's going to cause problems with our lead time. If you just kind of think through and analyze this, these different formulas. And of course, you can do the same thing with throughput equals and just change the formula around. The power of Little's law is not really its ability to predict WIP. That's not what we're trying to do, even though the formula says WIP is always going to be throughput times lead time. We're not really trying to predict. The true power really lies in your ability to influence team behavior with these assumptions. So if we know that WIP affects our lead time and our throughput, that can go a long way in helping employees connect a behavior with the result. So if they understand that a lot of WIP is going to mean that we're going to have really long lead times and we're having issues with lead time, then they will automatically know, or you can teach them, that by reducing WIP, because it's part of Little's law, it's automatically going to lead to a lower lead time. So it's the behavior that we're really looking at with this formula. And any three of these can also be metrics that you would choose to measure and possibly put targets towards. Lead time versus process time or cycle time, another word. They're technically a little bit different, but we'll go with it here. Lead time and cycle time, those two are really useful metrics. In lean, we see them a lot, and what we're trying to do is understand how long work takes to flow through our system. These two useful metrics are similar, but they're oftentimes confused. I remember in my beginning years of lean, it took me a while to figure out what the difference was between them. Both really help us understand how long it's going to take, but they measure different segments of the process. Where lead time clock starts when the request is made and ends at delivery. So customer calls, you place an order. And then it ends when the customer actually gets their order. That's lead time. And lead time really is what the customer sees. It's very customer driven. Cycle time, on the other hand, cycle time starts when work begins in a process specifically and ends when the item is ready to move to the next process. Process time or cycle time is part of lead time. It's a segment of that. And I like to call it reach to reach. That's what I've always used. If you're thinking in in a manufacturing facility or whatever kind of work, you know, you reach for something, you go to grab it, you do something with it, and then you put it down somewhere typically. The clock's going to start when you reach to get the part, and then it's going to end when you put it down. That's cycle time, and it's more of a mechanical measure of your process capability. It's calculated, it's one of the formulas in the lean, and it's calculated by dividing your WIP by your average completion rate. So there's WIP measurement in there again. So you all probably learned that one in lean training. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on how to calculate cycle time, but it's another one of those metrics that you can use to tell whether your project was successful or not. Did the cycle time go down? Did the lead time go down? Both of those things would be great to measure. Grabbing a drink here real quick. All right. The fourth rule that I have, how are we doing for time here? 11:40, getting close, is to design a process for your product. What you want to do is you want to make sure that you have some sort of standard process you're following for all of your lean project work. What this is going to do is it's going to ensure consistency when you're working on projects, and that everyone, including you, doesn't forget to perform critical steps of a project. And again, this is one of those things, I never followed a process. We just went in, kind of did stuff and moved on. While PDCA, I hope that's not a new term for you, Plan, Do, Check, Act, is only one planning method out of lots of different ones, DMAIC, whatever. It's one that's pretty widely used, especially in the lean world. PDCA it's just a critical thinking method, whereas we go through phases, such as plan, where we identify the problem, select the project, form the team, determine metrics, those kind of things. Then we have the do phase, and this is where we're actually implementing lean and we're putting countermeasures into place and really working the project. In the check phase, this is where we're going to review our results, because remember, in plan we set up those metrics. Now we're going to see what are our results compared to those metric targets, and then finally in the act phase, what we're going to do is we're going to identify any actions that we need to take. First of all, if our results to our targets was successful, we met them, then we're going to do some sort of action to make sure that those results don't backslide. We want to make sure that they stay in place and sustain. If they didn't, then we're going to have to determine what kind of improvements we need to make. What do we need to do differently? And we're going to kind of go back through the process again and maybe do something a little bit different. But we also, in this phase, we might also decide that, you know what, this project was successful. Are there other areas in the facility, or maybe a different process, that we could take this project and do it to that area as well? So different improvement areas. Lessons learned, they're always going to be part of the act phase. This is where you're going to do kind of that post-mortem and say, okay, what did we learn from this? And hopefully you're going to document those, because somebody may want to look back later and see what happened here. Were there any ahas? Were there any problems they ran into? Notice that on this particular visual here, we have a start and we have a finish. And in each of these phases, we have some dates or months, and at least months. These are projected. When do we think we're going to get into these? And again, just like any project, we want to plan things ahead of time. Planning part of this should be much bigger than all of the rest. We want to make sure that that we have some sort of timeline in place, and it can be adjusted as you go through the project, but at least you're planning for something. If any of you have sat for the Lean Bronze exam, you'll know that the actual portfolios you have to submit, they are presented in the PDCA format. Like I said, it's a pretty typical one. There's a reason for this. Another lesson those of us that have been practicing lean for a while learned is that you really need to manage those projects and ensure that you're not skipping some of these important phases. We want to make sure that we go through and we set metrics, right? We want to make sure that we understand the problem and that our solutions answer the problems. We don't want to skip that step, and so often we see that we actually do. We jump right into implementation and the rest of it just kind of, goes by the wayside. So this is one of the reasons that in the Lean Bronze portfolio, they make you kind of go through this process so that you get used to that format, that process of working your projects. If we just started implementing stuff without really taking the time to understand the problem, we might end up somewhere that we didn't really intend to be. So when I work with clients, and I did not do this always, again, lessons learned, when I started reviewing when I got my Lean Bronze certification years ago, and then I started reviewing for the portfolios, I actually started having my clients, as one of the first things we did, develop some sort of process for their Lean projects. And if they didn't have something, I actually used kind of the template with some tweaks that the Lean Bronze portfolio had, and for two reasons really. One, I actually think it's a really thorough way to do lean project management. I think that you really capture all of the different aspects of a project in the PDCA format. The second reason is that if anyone wants to use one of the projects that I'm working with them on towards certification, they're going to already have all of that information right there. And so they can just take that form that we filled out as part of the project and use it as one of their projects as part of their certification. So again, I really like the format, and whether you use that or another one, I highly encourage all of you to develop some sort of formalized process for managing your projects. Build this habit into your culture. This is going to help that culture part of Lean that we all really want to get to. Make it a requirement. Use whatever format you like, but make it a requirement. Purists. Lean purists might, balk at the thought of using DMAIC, for instance, because that's typically used in Six Sigma, but I don't really care. I mean, I think it's fine. I don't, it doesn't matter to me. It contains all of the critical elements of keeping your project on task, just like PDCA does, but it's something, and it will help you manage that really well. All right, fifth rule, get the right people involved. Without the right people to give the right input, your Lean implementation efforts really are going to be a lot less desirable than what you had planned, and we don't want that. I grew up in the Lean world where Lean was implemented by the Secret Service, otherwise known as the Lean team. They, would come in, swoop in. They had this secret language and they had special skills. And with the speed of a pit crew, they'd change our work areas, not really with any of our input, sometimes during the night. And it wouldn't make us happy. Trust me on this when I say this is the wrong way to implement Lean. I've been on both sides of the coin. Once when I was on the non-Lean or the non-Lean team side, where the Lean team at this particular company came in at night. They were doing us a favor by 5S'ing our area. Not only did they throw away a $75,000 fixture, but they moved some equipment to make a better process flow. And it invalidated our process. It was a government contract, and you didn't move anything unless you got their okay and you had lots of documentation. So we literally lost a $2 million order because of that, because they didn't have time to give us to validate it again. So another time, I was on actually the Lean team side, and we swooped in on a weekend with all of our Lean expertise. This was actually before that other incident. And we cleaned up an area, much like the other Lean team did to us, and we changed the flow. I mean, we wanted to be better efficient. We wanted to help people. And I cannot even describe to you how proud we were of our efforts. We all high-fived each other. I think we had, you know, a glass of wine or something after together. And we just really couldn't wait to show everyone in the area what we'd done for them. While I can't describe how elated we were, I also can't describe how angry this one gentleman was in particular, because we threw out his old desk and replaced it. We replaced it with a really cool ergonomic desk. It went up and down, and you know, it was when they were, you know, brand new. And the problem was is he had lots of stuff on this desk, and we didn't know because we didn't ask him, you know. So we got to be careful with that. The right way to implement any improvement project is to get the right people involved. That means representatives from the areas that are being worked on, and those that are going to be affected by the project, because there might be other people that if you change something, they will be affected. Make sure you're gathering the right subject matter experts. Don't forget the non-subject matter experts. You may know about bringing on subject matter experts, but maybe you haven't heard of or thought about bringing on people that know nothing. The idea of a non-subject matter expert is to make sure that you have people on the team that will say things with a fresh set of eyes. We've all been in situations where you've been doing something for so long, you just lose the ability to see opportunities. It's just, you know, you see things the same way you've been doing them all the time, you know. And one thing that makes me and others in the consulting world good at what we do is that we're kind of like 3-year-olds, you know. We go in and we have to ask why a lot, because we just don't know. We haven't yet been preconditioned with the way it's always been done. So
Chris,
non-subject matter experts add benefit.
Chris, can I interrupt you for a minute, please? We
Yeah.
are getting into the 10 minutes of the questions. Should we continue or what?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll keep going, and we should be done here pretty quick. Thank you
Okay.
for the reminder, Nerissa.
Thanks, Chris.
So anyway, moral of the story, make sure you choose the right team members wisely so that you have all of the puzzle pieces for a good project team. All right, 6th rule, make sure you're using different tools from your toolbox. Some lean purists might disagree with me, but I truly believe that lean was not meant to be a thing like we make it today. Lean, whether you believe it to be to have begun with Eli Whitney and his idea for interchangeable parts, or the training within industry program used in World War I and II, or you think it came from Henry Ford and his continuous flow method of manufacturing cars. We all have different opinions. You can Google that, and there's lots of different began. The same thing applies. It's just a name given in a book, The Machine That Changed the World in 1990, to some ways that Toyota solved some problems. As a matter of fact, none of the people credited with lean had ever heard of the word before. This word is fairly new. They were simple people, just like you and me, trying to solve their own problems. They came up with solutions that the rest of us have copied over the years, and we called them lean. You know, today we have a set of tools that some believe belong in the sacred lean toolbox, SMED, Kanban, 5S, you know, blah, blah, blah. We have other tools, though, like FMEA, SPC, theory of constraints, SIPOC diagrams, maybe. They believe they really belong in another toolbox. To me, all of these tools, they're just solutions people have come up with over the years to solve their own set of problems. And rule 6 is to never, ever think that lean is tools, first of all, and to never be afraid to use any tool to help you solve your own problems, or maybe a twist on one of those. You know, I tell people to act like a general contractor. Grab whatever tool makes sense for the job you're doing, and if none of the tools happen to work, make up your own. Teach people to experiment and try different things. Final rule is not only the one that I think is the most important, but it's the one I think is the most fun, and I like to have fun. So we all learn and start somewhere, but we need to be willing to break the rules, even the ones, the 7 that I've just gone over, and really just become explorers and problem solvers. It's easy and comfortable to read a book and take a class and just emulate what we learned. The world doesn't need more copycats. The world needs more pioneers like Henry Ford and Eli Whitney and Shigeo Shingo and James Womack and Mike Rother and others. You know, I had lunch with Mike Rother. He's the co-author of Value Stream Mapping and the author of the Toyota Kata books. And so I met with him for lunch a couple of years ago. And during our discussions, you know, I cribbed about, you know, being so honored to be sitting with one of the gurus of lean, and Mike very seriously said to me, you know, Chris, don't think of me as a guru. I'm just a guy that had some ideas and sold some books on those ideas. You know, if that's what being a guru means, then I want you and everyone that reads my books to break some rules and become the gurus of tomorrow. So whatever rules you think are in place, don't be afraid to do something different. Try different things. Make up your own twists on those tools. Do whatever it takes to help the organization reach its goals, and develop that culture of problem solvers. You know, if the culture requires that you lead and let them watch, do that for a while. If the culture demands that you spend a lot of time in change management, helping them ease into the you know, changes that lean brings, do that. Whatever it takes, go forth, have a blast, break the strings that have bound you, and become the next gurus. Who knows? Maybe you're going to be the next writer that makes $1 million on a book. That is all I have. Sorry we ran a little bit late there. I am open for some questions, and by the way, I am willing to stay just a few minutes after if we need to, since I think I just talked too much. I've been accused of that a time or two. Nariza, do I have any questions?
These questions that are posted on here are, do you feel there are any learnings the lean practitioner can gain from agile project management methodology?
So I actually have certification in with a PMP, and as I mentioned earlier, my undergrad was project management. So yes, I think there are definitely some lessons you can learn. I have always found that in lean, you know, one of the philosophies, not necessarily one of the principles, but one of the philosophies is to kind of keep it simple. We don't want to overcomplicate things, and the format that the PMP teaches in project management can tend to be pretty complicated and complex. And so while there are some things that I think you really should think about and maybe you pull in, I don't necessarily know that I personally would use the project management process for a lean event. But again, that's just my opinion, and it's very possible that I just haven't gotten comfortable doing it, and so I don't care for it. But definitely look at it.
The other question we have is, reduce scrap. Who made that objective, and how was it identified? By Bill Park.
So I'm not sure if you're asking about my specific examples or just who should make those. My firm belief, and this is just a practice that I have learned over the years, is I go to top management. I have just learned the hard way that if I start with objectives at a lower level.
Yeah, he's asking for specific examples.
So specific examples of who should make those?
Who made that objective, and how was it identified to reduce scrap?
Okay, so the example that I gave you when I said reduce scrap, of course, I've had many organizations that's been one of their goals, but that wasn't actually a specific example. But again, the objectives, whatever they are, should be coming from top management. You don't want an objective that comes from a lower level. If that's all you have, then that's what you have to deal with. But you want those objectives from high above, and they really should be part of the strategy planning of the top management of the organization. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but if it doesn't, jump back in and.
He says excess scrap may be a symptom.
Oh, absolutely. So what's interesting is if you look at objectives, most of it comes down to money in some way and symptoms of not making enough or something like that. And so I can have an objective to reduce scrap, but the reason we want to reduce scrap is because it is a symptom of our net profit being low. So yes, it can be a symptom absolutely of something else. And so it really comes down to what are the objectives that the company is setting that they want to focus on, maybe in this next year. And if scrap is the one, even though, maybe the net profit is down, and so they say, okay, scrap, we think that's our real big one, that's going to be our target, then yes, it can be a symptom and it can still be an objective that you're going to work on.
Okay. There's one more question from Senthil Kumar. Could you please tell me about certifications available in Lean? Do you offer services for improvements outside of the US? I think
so there are different Lean certifications. The one that is the most well-known is through the partnership of SME, AME, and Shingo. ASQ used to be part of that partnership. There's a Lean Bronze, Lean Silver, Lean Gold, and your best bet to get some upfront knowledge is go to either the sme.org website or ame.org website, and you'll be able to jump on and get some information on that. But I'm happy, if you would like, my email address is on the screen. Email me and we can have some further discussions on that.
Okay. There's another question from Mike. Milos Fusic. Do you have any suggestions about implementing Lean in high technocratic organizations where everybody knows solutions even before the planning phase?
That's every organization. Most organizations, that is just their modus operandi. They just jump to solutions, and that's the suggestion that I made on making sure you have a process. That is the reason that's there, is it stops people and makes them, instead of just jumping into the implementation phase it makes them stay in the plan phase and think about what is the problem, how are we going to measure it, who's going to be our team, and really start thinking through some of that. So that is the best suggestion I can make for you. I can't promise you that you have the authority or you have the ability to convince people that they must use it, but that's the best thing I found to kind of counteract that behavior, and it does. It happens everywhere. I've been guilty of it. I admit it.
Okay. The last I would take is: have you implemented Lean and in R&D? What made you successful?
So R&D can be a little bit different. The principles of Lean are the same no matter where you're implementing it. If you're in a hospital, you're in R&D, you're in receiving, you're in production. The principles and the philosophies are the same. The difference is in R&D, and yes, I have, is you're looking at things from a task level. Remember, we talked a little bit about some of the rules in there where we can start measuring tasks. You're going to look for wastes in there. We didn't really go through a whole Lean class here and the 8 wastes and all of that stuff. But again, the philosophy is the same. You're going to look at the processes. You're going to map them, whether it's with a value stream map or a process map. Value stream map is good. And you're going to take that product and you're going to work it through a process just like you were if it were out in production, just identifying the waste, ways to mitigate the waste, same kind of thing. If you have some processes that have some changeover, you're going to look at the same kind of things.
Okay, we will wrap this now. I would like to thank Chris Hayes for taking her time out to share with us some very important and interesting information that can be applied to any business organization and shall share the real-time application and experience. As I said earlier, Chris Hayes' presentation is now recorded and will be posted on the ASQ Lean and Division YouTube channel later this week. I want to remind you that on December 12th, Lean webinar is TPS in a non-factory setting. And the presenter for that webinar is Alan Michaels, a continuous improvement manager for Alabama State Port Authority. Thank you to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you, Nerissa. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.